Hello, welcome to King Info. Today we are going to examine the Chernobyl disaster. Chernobyl disaster, accident in 1986 at the Chernobyl Nuclear Power Station in the Soviet Union, the worst disaster in the history of nuclear power generation. The Chernobyl power station was situated at the settlement of Pripyat, 10 miles northwest of the city of Chernobyl, and 65 miles north of Kiev, Ukraine. The station consisted of 4 reactors, each capable of producing 1,000 megawatts of electric power. It had come online in 1977-83. The explosion at Unit 4 and initial containment efforts. The disaster occurred on April 25, 26, 1986, when technicians at Reactor Unit 4 attempted a poorly designed experiment. Workers shut down the reactor's power regulating system and its emergency safety systems, and they withdrew most of the control rods from its core while allowing the reactor to continue running at 7% power. These mistakes were compounded by others, and at 1:23 a.m. on April 26 the chain reaction in the core went out of control. Several explosions triggered a large fireball and blew off the heavy steel and concrete lid of the reactor. This and the ensuing fire in the graphite reactor core released large amounts of radioactive material into the atmosphere, where it was carried great distances by air currents. A partial meltdown of the core also occurred. On April 27, the 30,000 inhabitants of Pripyat began to be evacuated. A cover-up was attempted, but on April 28, Swedish monitoring stations reported abnormally high levels of wind-transported radioactivity and pressed for an explanation. The Soviet government admitted there had been an accident at Chernobyl, thus setting off an international outcry over the dangers posed by the radioactive emissions. By May 4, both the heat and the radioactivity leaking from the reactor core were being contained, albeit at great risk to workers. Radioactive debris was buried at some 800 temporary sites, and later in the year the highly radioactive reactor core was enclosed in a concrete and steel sarcophagus. Deaths, radioactivity, and the creation of the Chernobyl exclusion zone. Some sources state that 2 people were killed in the initial explosions, whereas others report that the figure was closer to 50. Dozens more people contracted serious radiation sickness. Some of them later died. Between 50 and 185 million curies of radionuclides escaped into the atmosphere, several times more radioactivity than that created by the atomic bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, Japan. This radioactivity was spread by the wind over Belarus, Russia, and Ukraine and soon reached as far west as France and Italy. Millions of acres of forest and farmland were contaminated. Although many thousands of people were evacuated, hundreds of thousands more remained in contaminated areas. In addition, in subsequent years many livestock were born deformed, and among humans several thousand radiation-induced illnesses and cancer deaths were expected in the long term. The Chernobyl disaster sparked criticism of unsafe procedures and design flaws in Soviet reactors, and it heightened resistance to the building of more such plants. Chernobyl Unit 2 was shut down after a 1991 fire, and Unit 1 remained online until 1996. Chernobyl Unit 3 continued to operate until 2000, when the nuclear power station was officially decommissioned. Following the disaster, the Soviet Union created a circle-shaped exclusion zone with a radius of about 18.6 miles centered on the nuclear power plant. The exclusion zone covered an area of about 1,017 square miles around the plant. However, it was later expanded to 1,600 square miles to include heavily radiated areas outside the initial zone. Although no people actually live in the exclusion zone, scientists, scavengers, and others may file for permits that allow them to enter for limited amounts of time. With the dissolution of the Soviet Union in 1991, control of the site passed to Ukraine. In 2011, the Ukrainian government opened parts of the exclusion zone to organized tour groups, and Chernobyl and the abandoned city of Pripyat became popular destinations for so-called dark tourists. During the Russian invasion of Ukraine in 2022, Russian forces attacking from Belarus captured Chernobyl after a brief but pitched battle. Combat at the site of the world's worst nuclear disaster led to concerns about damage to the containment structure and the possibility of widespread radioactive contamination.